I am. Yeah,
Correct me
yeah.
if I'm
No.
wrong.
The new Metal Gear Solid. That's a remake of Metal Gear Solid 3.
Okay, that's what I thought, but someone said I was wrong. But so
No, 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 it's Metal Gear Solid Delta or whatever I think is what they're calling it, but it's
okay.
it's Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater remake is what it is.
On that thought though, remake when it's used in marketing,
Yeah.
um, is it reasonable to be confused because you have two different types of remake in marketing? How are you supposed to know what type of game? What does that represent when
Yeah.
a game is
So
called remake?
I think it's confusing now more than ever because there's so many remakes and remasters and stuff, more than there ever has been, because like all these old IPs are like finally either being bought by a company and being brought back, which I'm all for, by the way. I know a lot of people hate it. Oh, how dare you remake or blah blah blah. Like I don't give a shit. I want other people to be able to experience these games in the modern time. Not everybody's going to go back and buy a PS1 just to play a game.
Mhm.
Okay. So let's go, for instance, uh let's go, like, for instance, Shadow Man Remastered. That game is a remaster because it's just like they took the best version of the game. They took a lot of the added stuff that was in the Nintendo 64 version and they upped the visuals. They made it run at 4K, 60, but it's largely the same game, so I would consider that a remaster. Um, any game that's like um basically the same game but with like some added cut content or added content or whatever that just like ups the resolution and cleans up the textures a little bit and adds some lighting improvements. That's a remaster, right? 100% that's a remaster, putting art Resident Evil 4 on everything in existence, that is a port. You know what I mean? And they put Stubbs the Zombie on PS4 and Xbox One and Switch, I think. Those are just ports. Like it runs a little bit better and it looks slightly better just because it's on newer tech, but it's just a port. Um, you know, Gears of War Ultimate Edition, that's a remaster because it's the same game, just slightly looks better. Um, but something like Resident Evil 4 Remake is not a remake, it's a reimagining because it is not the exact game. It is not just an updated game visually. It is an entirely different game with a completely different level design, and but it takes a lot of the original game and builds it from the ground up. Resident Evil 2 Remake is a reimagining, not a remake, because it is not even remotely the same game other than certain elements, but it's from the ground up an entirely different game. I mean, level for level, it doesn't even look the same. It doesn't even, the layout's not the same. Um, in the original Resident Evil 2, Mr. X didn't follow you everywhere either. That was a nemesis thing from Resident Evil 3. So it's an entirely reimagined game that stays mostly true, but it's not the same. It's like Doom 2016. That's a reboot. You know what I mean? It's still technically Doom. It's not a remake. It's a reboot of the series, which technically is also a sequel. So
So
yeah, it gets a little confusing, right? Dead Rising Deluxe Remaster. That's some horse shit. That made it very difficult for people to know what the fuck that is. It is not a remaster. I want to tell you, it is not a remaster. Dead Rising Deluxe Remaster is not a remaster. It is a remake because it is entirely the same game on a brand new engine built from the ground up with added content, original content, quality of life changes, and some entirely game changing elements like checkpoints that completely change how Dead Rising can be played. You can turn those off, thankfully, but yeah, there's so many quality of life improvements in Dead Rising Deluxe Remaster that the game is actually made even easier. And if you already know how to play the game, it's extremely easy. But it's a relatively difficult game for most people out there. Um, and then, for instance, Ninja Gaiden 2 Black. The original Ninja Gaiden Black was a remake, technically, of the original Ninja Gaiden that looked a little bit better, added more stuff, and was a definitive version of the game. Ninja Gaiden 2 Black is on an entirely different engine. It is a remake of a 2008 game in Unreal Engine 5 that, oddly enough, takes elements of the original game and elements of the remastered Ninja Gaiden Sigma 2 version of the game that was released on PS3 and combines them to make this supposedly definitive version of the game, which is very divisive among fans as of late. Um, but I would consider a remake, not a remaster, because it is like from the ground up, faithfully the same game, but more than just a HD texture pack. You know what I mean? Like it's like a entirely new assets. Like it was built from the ground up to be very much faithful, much like Destroy Humans 1 and 2 remakes. They're built from the ground up with quality of life improvements, etc. New engine, new graphics, and so on. Those are remakes. Remasters are just touch-ups, maybe with added things on new consoles. Remakes are like ground up overhauls. Ports are just ports, right? And then reimaginings are like remakes of the game that are also pretty much entirely different games. So yeah, it's extremely confusing, but like that's how I would define it.
So, what would you consider? What would you call the thing? The movie, The Thing.
Yeah,
What would you consider that?
that new game.
No, sorry, it's a movie.
Huh?
1982.
But yeah, no, I mean, there's a movie, and then they made a game of that movie.
Correct. Yeah, starring Kurt Russell. What would you consider The Thing in terms of that realm of definitions?
The original movie.
Yeah, yeah, The Thing. Do you think it's a remake or just original?
Um, was there a thing before the thing?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I thought. I guess it would. I don't think I watched the thing that came out before that one. Um, but I would say that it's. How similar are they?
It conceptually pretty similar, but they do reimagine a lot of things. But it's
Right.
also very
Okay.
well known
So.
as being a remake.
Right. Okay.
Do you
So.
think look, before you add on, do you think
Yeah.
that remake can be an umbrella term?
For.
Several things, reboot, reimagining.
No, I don't think it can be an umbrella term. I think it has to be a very defined term. I think all of them have to be pretty defined. I don't think any of them can be umbrella. I don't think remake can be umbrella term because and it's used as one. But for that instance of like Resident Evil 2 and 4 remakes, they're not even remotely faithful like at all. I mean, other than certain boss fights and characters, etc. But they're not really faithful to the overall game design as a whole. So they're not,
So
remaking the same game.
so let's say you mess up. I'm just throwing several things at you. I just want to see where you stand.
Yeah, well, okay. Before you say it, with the thing, for instance,
Hmm.
I would say it's just like a reimagining of that original concept, um, if not potentially even a reboot or whatever, because it's very much similar, but it's also like almost entirely like John Carpenter's vision of it, I guess. So it's while sharing the same concept, I would say it's a reimagining because it's
Okay.
similar but not the same.
So do you think a movie remake doesn't exist?
No, a movie remake. I think a movie remake does exist.
Do you have any examples?
I guess in the sense. Let me just think real quick. Man, what was a let's see movie remake? Honestly, I can't think of anything. I don't know. No, not really. I can't think of anything. I mean, how about I say no? Reimagining is the only thing that there is. Remake does not exist when it comes to movies because none of them are that case. Because there's not a single remade movie that is like word for word the same thing. It is not word for word the same. It's not structured the same. It's not directed the same. There's not a single movie in existence that is exactly the same as the movie that came before, and all they did was make it look better.
Well, try to make it
Or
look better.
right, try and make it look better. Yeah, sometimes it's
Because
an absolute dog shit in comparison.
well,
But yeah, no, I think when it comes to movies, it's yeah, no, it's I don't think it's the case. Because Because when they do a remake, it's never the same. It's not even remotely the same. Like it's okay, maybe the main plot point is pretty close to the same thing, but it's like not the same. You know, trying to think of an example of anything. It's hard to think because
Well, the closest thing movie wise I can think
let's
of is
say
Psycho.
okay, yeah, yeah. I was gonna
But
say fucking what was it called?
but
Point Break was the one I was gonna say.
the Psycho, attempt,
Yeah,
it was a shot for shot, but the performances
right.
were drastically worse than the original,
Yeah,
and that was basically the biggest problem.
yeah,
Therefore, it does, you can fit it under the bill of reimagining because the performances are different. Therefore, you're not going to get the same,
right.
experience from the first film.
But I would say that at least it was probably one of the only things in history, just about it in cinema, that probably attempted to be an actual remake, truly shot for shot,
Now,
but failed.
do you think a actual remake of a movie, if it could exist, do you think it would be successful?
If they did somehow shot for shot do it, and the performances were somehow on par or maybe even better,
But if
if
it's just
that was
if it's slightly
if it
different
was
though,
achievable, if it was shot by shot and it was achievable, and they did do it, it could be successful, but it probably wouldn't be because people would be like, "Why is it just the same movie, but not the same
well,
movie?"
let's take Jaws for example.
Yeah.
They use practical effects all the way through, and
Yep.
more than likely, they're not going to do that these days. They're not going to use a
No.
mechanical shark,
CGI. It's gonna be
CGI.
dog shit.
Yeah, exactly. So movie remakes, reimaginings, whatever, if it stays shot for shot, script by script,
Yep.
it's not going to be
Yeah.
successful. When you see a new release of a film, you want
Exactly.
to see something different. You want to see the story
Exactly.
altered in a different way. And so
Which you would
possibly
think
it
that
could,
it's not a thing. Yeah.
yeah. So, but with video games, whenever they are
Yeah.
approached that way, marketed that way, they are more
It's a lot easier
successful.
to do it as a video game.
Like with Crash Bandicoot.
Yeah.
Crash Bandicoot was marketed
Well.
as a fully remastered
Yep.
game, but later on, you had games like Medieval where it was originally marketed as remastered, but then they switched to remake, and
Wait.
I
And
don't know the
that's
sale of
just
that
they
one.
don't know their own terms is the issue there. Um, Crash Bandicoot I would call a remake. Or yeah, a remake because it is the same game in a new engine with new graphics and different quality of life improvements, etc., all in one big bundle. It's not identical. Like it's identical because it's faithful from the ground up, but it was remade in a different engine, so therefore it is a remake. It's not a reimagining because it is the same game. It is the same game except for visuals are better. Some of the gameplay is even better. Not a big Crash fan, but the same goes for Spyro Reignited Trilogy. It is literally the same game with quality of life improvements, and in fact, the remake almost teeters visually into a reimagining territory because they're able to put so much more detail into the environments where they're actually putting things there that were more left to the imagination in the really terrible polygonal graphics of the PS1 for especially early Spyro where there was less detail. So I would still consider it a remake because it is faithfully the same game, same characters, same plot, same everything from beginning to end of all three games, except the visuals are much improved in a new engine with quality of life improvements.
What do you think about?
Destroy Humans 1 and 2 are like that, are perfect examples of being a remake. Where Destroy Humans 1 is a remake with quality of life improvements because they actually added gameplay elements from Destroy Humans 2 into the first game, which does change it and deviate it from being exact copy, but it's still the same game with quality of life improvements, better graphics, new engine,
What do you think about the term fully remastered?
fully remastered. I don't know what the fuck that's supposed to mean. Like, what's a partial remaster? A port?
Mm-hmm.
So now it's supported with upscaling. So that makes it a partial remaster because it can be upscaled. Because anything put on a modern console gets auto HDR. Any port gets auto HDR, and it gets upscaled to whatever if I play Stubbs a Zombie on my Series X, the port version of the game supports an upscaled version of 4K HDR, and the frame rate might improve just because it's on more tech. It's still just a port. It's the same damn game. It only runs because it's on better tech. It only runs better because it's on better tech. It only looks better because it's being upscaled to not look choppy automatically by the technology that's running on. But it's the same game. They didn't do anything to improve it. So that's a port, which you could call in theory, you could call a partial remaster. And then when you say a full remaster, I mean, it's just a remaster. I mean, it's just saying, hey, I took Darksiders 1 and 2 from Xbox 360 and PS3 and put it on PS4 and Xbox One, which they just did again, by the way. They just remastered them again and released them on Series X and PS5, which the only difference in Darksiders 1 and 2 on Series X PS5 is that they now run at 4K. That's it. Oh, and up to 120 FPS, because on Xbox One and PS4 they ran 1080p 60, or PS4 and Xbox One they ran 1080p 60, 360 and PS3 they ran like 720 to 1080i, like 30 FPS. So those are just remasters. Technically, I would almost say that the version being released on Series X PS5 is just a updated port, because it's the same game. It's the same remastered version that was on Xbox One and PS4. The only difference now is it's 4K. So it's still technically a remaster, but it's less of a leap, I guess.
So it can remake can only be used as a verb.
Yeah.
Okay. If you actually do Google remake, there's actually a
Yeah.
verb and a noun.
Really?
Yeah. So I thought that was interesting.
And if you Google the remake, what is the definition they're giving you?
To make again, to make anew, something like that, around that realm.
I mean, right, the actual definition of the word itself. Yeah, I mean, so, but that's the other thing about the English language. It's very contextual. You can take the literal definition, but when you take it into context, it can mean something entirely different. And that's the sad part, because it makes things extremely confusing. Because in theory, based on the actual definition of remaster and the actual definition of remake, you can go and say every remaster is in fact a remake, and every remake is in fact a remaster. They're almost one and the same, but there has to be, a difference for it to make any sense in marketing, or make any sense to anybody to be able to differentiate between a remaster and remake, which right now is being used very interchangeably. Whether we go for the literal definition or not, I mean, there's companies out there calling a port a remaster. There's people out there calling a remake a remaster, and a remaster a remake. They're just not the same damn thing. That's why I have to come down and be like, okay, well, remake is taking something from the ground up, trying to be faithful, but it's in a completely different engine with potentially improvements and added content. And a remaster is just taking the same game and making it run at a higher frame rate and higher resolution with potentially quality of life improvements. Those are not guaranteed. A port is just taking the same game and now it runs on something else, but it doesn't change its performance or quality outside of whatever the system itself does automatically. So no, that doesn't fit the literal definition, but it's kind of the only thing that makes any logical sense.
I just want to throw this one at you because I'm just very curious on your thoughts on this as well. And this isn't. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah,
I
so
wasn't going to do it for a second there, yeah.
let's just say you're making something. You're preparing food for scrambled eggs, for example. You make scrambled eggs and whatever you season them with, and you give them to whoever wanted some scrambled eggs. And the person you gave the scrambled eggs to say, I don't like the way you prepared these. And so, what do you say in response to that?
What? Such a random question. Is it
I know. I
unrelated?
just want to see where you come from on this.
Oh, okay.
So
So if
if
you're
you
saying
messed
that
up
I
these eggs,
prepared, something like scrambled eggs for someone and they didn't like the way it was prepared because they prefer something else,
Hmm.
what would my response be to that?
Correct. What would you say? Like, okay, you messed up the eggs. You got to make them better. So what do you say?
Hmm. I guess I would say, um, what is it you would like done differently?
Hmm. And
You
so
know, yeah,
and so you basically, when you go back, you make them again, right?
correct.
And you improve them
Potentially, yeah.
potentially. Yeah. So hopefully you do
Yeah.
improve them. So I mean, you when you say that's remaking the eggs,
Yeah,
it wouldn't
that
be
would be in theory remaking the eggs, yes.
okay. And you are making
And
them differently, right? So they're more appealing to who wanted the scrambled eggs, or at least attempting to make them appealing to the person that wanted the eggs.
yes,
Okay.
in that scenario, yes.
So in that context, reimagining wouldn't fit that.
No, I don't think so.
Because you don't say, I'm going to go reimagine the eggs.
I mean, you technically are doing that, right?
Hmm.
But no, you would be remaking the eggs or cooking the eggs again. Yeah,
Hmm.
you would be
But you're not
doing
making
that.
them exactly the same. You have to change
No,
whatever you did that was wrong.
yeah,
Let's just say
exactly. Yeah, yeah,
maybe you left. It doesn't even have to be with seasoning. Maybe you left them on the oven too long and they burnt. Like
right,
okay,
right.
well, I gotta take them off the eye a little bit sooner.
It's actually kind of funny because I work in a Waffle House, so it's kind of funny.
You work at a Waffle House,
Yeah,
but yeah, I just wanted to see where you stood on that one. Just
yeah, yeah.
um,
Hey, it's an intricate conversation about a very funny way of, you know, describing things based on literal definitions that can't even describe the things in which they're supposed to describe.
hmm
And that's just a problem with video games in general. That's not even starting with movies and so on. Like that's just video games, man. Like you can't even define what a first person shooter is. So let's not even start there. Okay, because the spectrum in which first person shooter, there's no one thing. Okay, you got boomer shooters, movement shooters, arena shooters. I mean, Serious Sam is not the same as Quake. Doom isn't even remotely the same as Bulletstorm. You can take Call of Duty, Medal of Honor, and then take freaking the finals. It's not the same game. Battlefield, Arma, they're none of them are the same.
hmm
You know, they all come from a very similar place, but they're not the same. So it's like an umbrella term, but I don't think remake is an umbrella term for those kind of things. So it's all contextual, right? But
Gotcha.
yeah,
Oh,
I mean, if I was talking like, I mean, I usually refer to like Resident Evil 2 as a remake,
mhm.
but it's a reimagining of the game. It's you get very, very technical about it, then it could still technically be a remake, just not a faithful remake, right? So I guess it could be, if you want to define it even further and cut it in half, then you could have remake and faithful remake, right? So you just throw reimagining out the door and you just have remake and faithful remake, because technically reimagining and remake can be the same thing. They're words that mean very similar things, almost identical, but it's just how you refer to it. So I mean, you could say Resident Evil 2 is a remake, not a faithful remake. It's semi-faithful, but not fully faithful. Just
He froze up on me. Oh no, he froze up on me. I had more questions. There you are.
that's funny. Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know, Evan. You froze for me too, but yeah, I can still
Oh.
hear you the whole time.
What were you saying? You were talking
I
about.
was just saying, yeah, yeah. I mean, it was basically Detroit Humans 1 is a faithful remake that modified it with some quality of life improvements.
So, when I first brought it up, the problem that I have personally is whenever something's coming out and is claiming to be a remake, I don't know what it's going to be exactly. Let's just say Resident Evil 4 came out, it was advertised as a remake.
Right.
I don't know if that's going to be just like the original, or is it going to be a reimagining?
Right. Well,
Silent
in
Hill
that case,
2.
it's like it's very similar, right? Like it's like Resident Evil 4, which I still need to play that. By the way, I still need to
It's
play it.
actually very
But
different. There's only a couple spots
right,
that are very similar to the original game, but most of
right.
it's very different.
Yeah, there's a few parts that are like similar, but it's mostly a completely different game. It's the same with Resident Evil 2. I mean, I played classic Resident Evil 2 and I played the Resident Evil 2 remake,
Hmm.
and it is very similar in a lot of ways, but it is entirely a different game
Were you
fundamentally.
expecting when they announced the Resident Evil 2 remake? Were you expecting it to be an upgraded graphically of the original game?
I don't even know if they were calling it a remake when they first launched it or not. But when they announced it, I was expecting something that was faithful, I guess, more faithful, I guess. I don't think I ever beat the original Resident Evil 2. I'm not even a mega fan of it or anything, but yeah, I mean, I guess I was when they said it. I mean, I don't even know if they said remake, but I know they definitely didn't say remaster. Um, so if they would have said remaster, then I'm like, oh yeah, it's just basically it'd just be Resident Evil 2, but like I can now play it on my Xbox. With now it runs at 1080 or something, but with the Resident Evil 2 remake, I was like, okay, yeah. So I mean, it might be, I was thinking, okay, it'll be faithful, but obviously they're redoing all the graphics, and it's like, obviously there's gonna be new assets, everything's gonna be different for the most part, like as far as graphically and technologically. Uh, yeah, I mean, but I've been used to remasters for years of so many different games, so it's remasters and ports have been a common thing for a long time. Remakes were not that common. A lot of them were, more like reboots back in the day than anything. Ninja Gaiden's a good example. Like the classic trilogy was on NES, was a 2D side scroller. When they made Ninja Gaiden in 2004, they called that a reboot because it was fundamentally not even really the same thing. It's actually a continuation of the series, not even the same character, and it's technically a spinoff of Dead or Alive. Um, but it was the same name, but a completely different kind of game. So it's a reboot. It's much like the 2010 Splatterhouse game. That's just it's a reboot of the original series because it's technically still connected, but it's an entirely different genre of game.
Is
Not even
that
remotely the same.
so? Reboot and reimagining, that's not the same to you?
I think they're pretty similar.
Okay.
Um,
When a when a series comes
it just
back,
it's
is
but it's the difference of like I mean I guess it's kind of a similar concept, but yeah, I mean reboot and reimagining are kind of I don't know. I guess
is
in a way they're
yes.
interchangeable, but they're very, very, very similar. Um, but I guess there's a few things that make it slightly different. So it's like, for instance, Doom 2016 is just called Doom,
Hmm.
therefore it makes it a reboot, right? But technically, it's a reboot of the series, but it's also a sequel to the series because they would later confirm that it's actually a sequel to like Doom 64.
Do you think that's the
Right? So
right
it
way to market it?
continues. Probably not. It's
Do you
pretty
think
confusing.
reboot is a key word that gets people excited to want to jump back on? I mean,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
would you
I think
say
so because they're like, because I think they're expecting something like of a similar ilk, but different. They're also expecting something different. I think reboot is probably a pretty good buzzword that makes people want to tune in.
say I've
But I
always
think
known
also in
for
this day and age, it's like a pretty mixed term as well.
I've always um, seen whenever a TV show comes back. For example, I think the first time I ever saw it might have been Beavis and Butthead when they first came back in
Yeah,
2013, I think, or 2012 when they came back, they were calling it a revival.
Yeah.
So
And then
it wasn't a they weren't
recently they came back again and
yeah
they called it a reboot.
yeah isn't that weird?
Yeah.
So
It's happened more than once, but it's the same thing. It's not
mhm.
even. It's just it should just be billed as a continuation. It's not even. It isn't even a re. So it's the same thing. It's not even a reboot.
See, it
Um,
used to be they're back. Oh, your
yeah,
crazy characters, they're back. That used to be the big, and
yeah,
they still use that sometimes. But now, sometimes you'll see revival and then reboot, and
yeah.
I think a lot of.
Futurama was like, hey, there's just more Futurama coming.
hmm So it's really
So
it's just really fun seeing the marketing techniques that they use with
yeah,
products. And even when it comes to sounds, I find that very interesting. Manufactured sounds, the way a vacuum sounds, the way a car door
oh
sounds
yeah.
when it shuts, all that is manufactured. It's not.
Some pretty um, good examples of like remasters and stuff. Is Dark Souls remaster, right?
Mm,
I mean, for all intents and purposes, that is the definition of remaster. It's the same game, but just made better graphically, and technically, it runs at a higher frame rate, so it's a better game. It's remastered,
mm.
right? Um, but it's still the same engine and everything, so it's just remastered. Now then you have Dark Souls 2 Scholar of the First Sin Edition. Now that's a whole ballgame. Like, what do you call that exactly?
Remix,
Because it's not. Yeah, it has to be a remix, right? Because
because
it's still Dark
that's
Souls 2 fundamentally, but adds a whole other possible like ending, final boss, and changes the entirety of all the spawns in the game. Um, changes a lot actually, entire areas of the game, but also is graphically improved more significantly than something like the Dark Souls remaster.
would that fall under reimagining too? Remix.
Maybe, maybe like it would be pretty damn close because it's like it's still basically the same game,
You know,
and it's still fairly different because it's almost not the same game, even though it is the same game.
it's
I mean, the
funny how
bosses are the same, but it's like it's all placed different. It's weird.
they bank off the RE a lot. Look at Spyro, well, which one? Reignited. They use
Yeah,
Spyro
we're finding a
Reigniting
lot of
Edition.
new ways to to say
Yeah,
remaster,
the magic of marketing. So SpongeBob, the Battle of Bikini Bottom, is called SpongeBob
rehydrated,
Rehydrated. Yes,
yeah,
yes, and
remastered edition for Red Faction Gorilla,
yeah. So they,
Darksiders War Mastered edition, Darksiders 2 Death Initive
mm-hmm,
edition. It's
definitive.
also
Yep.
funny that one says War Mastered, which is it's another thing. Is there's definitive edition and remastered. Both are the same term basically. Um, it's just one is claiming to be the definitive version of the game, but every time that it's used with a game is used for a remaster.
What about Mafia?
That's a remake
Yeah.
because it's
Well,
a ground up remake. But they say definitive edition. Is it? Yeah, I think so. It is the definitive edition of the game,
mm,
but it is a remake. Versus like the Mafia 2 and Mafia 3 that they released in the big Mafia collection would be billed as I don't know if they'd quite reach remaster, maybe just ports. I'm not sure how much work was put into Mafia 2. Mafia 3 is just a port, but Mafia 2 might be a remaster. But Mafia 1 is definitely a remake. But
they did.
that's what I'm saying is like definitive is used. They use it for both remasters and remakes, and it doesn't really mean anything
Yeah, it's
because it's
just
like
more of a. It's just a. Yeah, it's just another marketing thing. It's just
that's
people.
what Ninja Gaiden is. I mean,
Yep.
black is their definition, their version of a definitive version.
hmm
But I guess it sometimes isn't always the case.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
quite
it's a
interesting.
marketing thing.
Yeah, it's quite an interesting subject because you want to find consistency, but it's not there, and that's what frustrates me the most about looking into this is that
Yeah,
it's just not. No one's using them. The way I've grown up seeing them consistently. Like, what would you consider 2005's release of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory? release do you think that is?
I mean, every version of that movie, even the new one, Wonka, right? They would want you to say, so they're all remakes, right?
Mm-hmm.
I guess they are all remakes. They're just not faithful, right? If we get down to brass tacks here,
True.
they're not. None of them are the same. Like not even remotely. The closest is the original and the first, reimagining, reboot, remake version is the closest, to being to the original. Whereas Wonka is like an origin story. It's a prequel more than anything. It wouldn't. It's not even a remake. It's just a prequel.
Right.
But it's a prequel film.
Prequel for the Willy, well, for not for the book, but for Willy Wonka and Chocolate Factory.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's just the whole thing, But also, it's like something like that. That's a prequel. Still completely deviates from either of the other two films in what it contains. So it's none of them really, uh, coincide with each other at all. None of them are the same. None of them gel. And of course, you take book to movie, and that's an adaptation, which is another, it's a reimagining of someone else's work, which is what an adaptation is.
Mm.
And there's a whole other can of worms to open on, like, adaptations of things, books, movies, games, whatever, when brought to other things. So,
So, would you
yeah,
consider
it's
Charlie
a
and Chocolate
complex
Factory from
thought process.
2005? Oh, sorry.
I said it's a complicated thought process. It's like
Yeah,
just
that's why it's one of my
determining
favorite topics to talk about. I've talked to so many people about this because it's so much fun for me. But Charlie
Yeah,
and
I mean,
Chocolate.
I would consider that movie. I consider it a reimagining of the original because that's what it's
Of the
attempting
film,
to do.
the reimagining of Willy Wonka and Chocolate Factory.
Yeah, yeah, of the film. Yeah,
So what is exact? What is it exactly reimagining? What is it borrowing from the original film?
man, the Chocolate Factory, I guess.
Well, that's from the book.
Um, right, right, but it's reimagining. It's reimagining that movie. I mean, I could almost guarantee that director was reimagining that movie. Was it Tim Burton who did that one?
Yep.
Right. Yeah, I could guarantee he was not trying to directly do the book.
Yeah, it's
Um,
really hard to go to adapt the book directly when you have an existing movie,
yeah,
and I'm sure Tim Burton used some notes possibly, but the Charlie and Chocolate Factory kind of in a way is more close to the book, especially with the Veruca Salt being the
the 2005 movie.
yes,
Yeah.
because Veruca Salt, her the way she's you know eliminated is directly
Yeah.
from the book, not the Willy Wonka movie.
Mm.
The Willy Wonka movie is the Golden Goose part, is part with
Right,
Veruca
right, right.
Salt.
So, yeah, I mean, from my perspective, as somebody who is not that interested in Charlie and Chocolate Factory, who's never read the book and has seen each of the movies maybe a couple times
Mm-hmm.
and really take it or leave it. Um, to me, it always seemed like the newer movie was trying to reimagine the original movie. Um, but I'm sure with closer inspection, it was probably more like Tim Burton took inspiration from the original movie while trying to adapt the book. So it was probably a mixture of the two things, um,
Yep. Yeah, of course.
more than likely, which is usually how inspiration works. Because a lot of times you're inspired by things without even knowing that you're inspired.
Mm-hmm.
A pretty good comparison point for a movie that I actually really like, a great film, is Guillermo del Toro's Nightmare Alley. Great, great film, which is adapted from a short story. I believe it was a short story. And there was a movie, a black and white movie, many years ago that was made of that short story, in which is similar, but they're both fairly different movies, even though they share certain scenes that are pretty close together, just because both of them were trying really hard to adapt the book or the short story. Um, but Guillermo del Toro has been, I'm sure he had seen it um, before, as he had interest in the short story, but he said that he did not try to copy, take inspiration, or use anything from that original film when making his film. And largely his film is vastly different in for the majority of it. But it has certain scenes that are very similar just because of that, being an adaptation of something else.
Mm. Well,
But
have you seen the
yeah,
Wonka movie?
the new one, yeah.
Did you know that's actually a prequel and a reimagining?
A prequel and a reimagining because it's technically a prequel to what we see in the movies, but
No,
and possibly also the books, but it's a reimagining of every bit of the source material.
it's a reimagining of a totally different story.
Oh, interesting.
Have you ever seen Fantastic Mr. Fox?
Yes, yes.
You don't see any similarities?
Well, I guess not, as you say it. Yeah, I guess so. So it's a reimagining that, but
But
Willy
it makes
Wonka
sense, doesn't it?
paint.
Because who are the two books, Fantastic Mr. Fox and Charlie and Chocolate Factory? Who wrote those two books?
I don't actually know. I don't know.
Ronald Dow. He wrote both books.
Okay.
So
Okay. I mean, I guess it makes sense too.
yeah, so it was. I was watching the movie in the theater, and I looked at my wife. And I'm like, I already seen this movie. I know how this movie's going to end because you got three corporate big heads
Yeah.
that are they're high strung and they want to take
Yeah.
down the guy that's trying to build himself up, wants to be successful. Then they shoot him down a really like for example, Fantastic Mr. Fox. He's doing well underneath the ground. Oh, there's a little side hint with the underground tunnel system. Same thing with Fantastic Mr.
Right.
Fox. Same thing
Right.
with Wonka. They're in the
Yeah. Yeah.
sewers and it's watch Wonka again. Watch Mr. Fantastic
Yeah.
Mr. Fox and then watch Wonka directly after, and you'll be surprised how many things they borrow from the story. But it's almost
Hmm.
exactly the exact same thing.
It's really interesting. Yeah.
But I just wanted to throw that in there because I feel like I'm the only person that knows about it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I looked
Yeah.
it up on
I
the
mean,
internet.
yeah.
There's nothing. Yeah.
I never would have thought about that. Yeah. Because I've only seen Fantastic Mr. Fox like one time. But yeah, I never would have thought about that.
Oh boy.